this chapter, we're getting the rest of Dabi's backstory, and I guess how it brings everything full circle and makes it relate to almost everything else that's going on, at least on the villain side of things. So the chapter opens up with Dr. Yujiko in his cell talking to like this gorilla prison guard. And this is the first time that we've seen Yujiko in a very long time. I think since the war, maybe, because after the war was over, he was one of the significant villains to actually be arrested and in prison. And he says everything was for this moment. We had to search for so long for all those small stunted seeds worthy of being vessels. So he's referring to the process that they've been putting Shigaraki through in order to become a proper vessel for All for One. Apparently, in order for All for One to take One for All, he needs to transfer to a body that has like this unrequited hatred within it, because apparently All for One doesn't have it within himself already. And I guess the best way they thought of doing this was getting children and nurturing them to become hatred vessels, because somehow this is going to bypass the failsafe that One for All has within itself to stop it from being taken by the All for One Corps. And it makes sense, since I guess they knew this for many years. I mean, they've been crafting this plan for a very long time. So naturally, they'd have way more candidates than just Shigaraki or Tenko Shimura, because it's going to be revealed in this chapter that little Dabi, aka Toya Todoroki, was also one of these candidates, because after he burned himself up trying to impress Endeavor on Mount Sokoto, he was somehow visited by All for One. And the way that he's dressed here pretty much confirms that he was in fact the one who dropped off Tenko to his mother, therefore giving him the decay quirk since it manifested after that. And I know I've talked about that many times in previous videos, but I'm going to make a new video about that because I'm sure at least some of you aren't familiar with the whole All for One giving Shigaraki decay theory. But anyway, after All for One picks up little burnt up Toya, we cut to 3 years later where he wakes up inside of this makeshift orphanage place. And a lot of you have been telling me that this place looks extremely similar to the place that we see Child Overhaul at the beginning of chapter 158. And yeah, it turns out that this is pretty much the same place, which means that yeah, Overhaul was also a previous All for One hatred vessel candidate. And I'd like to also make a separate video about that because there's a lot to go into with all of that stuff. But after Dabi wakes up from his 3-year-long coma, we see that he's still Toya. He hasn't like completely lost himself yet. He's still remorseful for how he acted leading up to his final moments. And he wants to go back and see his family, but more so Endeavor because, you know, he's obsessed with him, but he wants to apologize as well. And we see this voice coming from a blank computer screen talking to him, and he pretty much tells him that you're not going to be able to go back to your family, and that because of what he did on Mount Sokoto, his body was destroyed, and that putting him back together was an extreme procedure, and that all of his partially destroyed tissue has been grafted back onto him to speed up his recovery, and that also he won't be able to use his abilities like he was before, and that he sustained grave damage in several organs, and that his somatic nervous system is impaired, meaning that pain will become duller to him, and he'll never be able to go back to how he was before. So yeah, it turns out that the aesthetic that we see Dabi have is of course a result of his own inflictions, but also because of the procedures that Yujiko performed on him. Now obviously the current Dabi that we see, or at least before this chapter, was more so of a gradual decline, and it seems like he was doing some kind of personal fixes to himself. But he essentially goes on to tell Dabi that he wanted him to join their ranks, but since he's so damaged that he's essentially a failure, reminding him of what Endeavor told him, which was like a really harsh, pragmatic way of Endeavor to try to not get Dabi to do this to himself, because he saw that, you know, he was pushing himself so much that it was eventually going to lead to this. But I guess it was all for naught, unfortunately. But then Yujiko says that he may be able to restore his firepower to as it was before, but he's going to have to partake in his classes. And this was like the breaking point for young Dabi, and he like sets the orphanage place on fire and then leaves. And it comes back to Yujiko saying it was too late to show him the way. He was too burned out already. Even him who controls everything, All for 1, found it impossible to manipulate the obsession that he had for his father. And he says the reason that they let Dobby go was because of his body after waking up. It shouldn't have even lasted a month. Then going further, we see another flashback of Yujiko introducing Dobby to the high-end Nomu hood, and we're getting an extended dialogue sequence here that we weren't privy to originally, where it turns out that Dobby knows that Yujiko was the one who kept him alive. And he says, looking at that living corpse over there, Hood, I can get a good solid idea of what y'all did to me back then, and that the reason he came back was because it's the perfect spot for a funeral. And then Yujiko said that one look said it all. This body that overcame even death was held together by the flames of vengeance. Then we find out that when he ran away from the orphanage place after burning it down, he did try to return home. But once he got there, he saw the memorial to him, as well as Endeavor like brutally training young Shoto. And he concluded that his family had already moved on from him, and that his life no longer had any meaning. Then we come back to the present with Dobby facing off against Shoto, and he says, when you cross certain limits, the things that used to shape you lose all meaning. I devoted myself just to make my flame stronger. I couldn't face him while being weak. And then Shoto's like, you wanted to die from the start. And Dobby says, Toya died, and Dobby was born. And we see him in front of the memorial. And I always thought this was a cool little nod to the name of Dobby's quirk, which is cremation. And I'm not sure if it's ever said in the series, but we do get that information in the Ultra Analysis book. Since cremation is something that is done to bodies after the funerals, as to where they're lit up inside of a furnace and reduced to ashes so that the family can keep them afterwards. So again, pretty cool of Horikoshi to have that little nugget of information hiding in plain sight this whole time. And then we see like full-blown unhinged Dobby here with his skin melted off, and we kind of just see like this burnt tissue zombie-esque form. And he says, I'll burn everything precious to him to the ground. That will be proof that I ever existed. And we see him about to conduct a flash fire fist. And the reason he knows how to do this, along with the prominence burn, as well as like being able to fly via his jets from his feet, is because he says he's seen many of Endeavor's moves because over the years he watched him on TV. And then the chapter ends with Shoto saying, like, I'm gonna let you do that. So yeah, pretty tragic story for Dobby / Toya here. I mean, we already kind of knew that when we got his initial backstory, but now that it's come full circle, it's even more tragic, but at the same time, he's kind of brought it upon himself. And yes, he could have had a better upbringing, of course, but we do see the other side of the coin with Shoto. You don't necessarily have to become a homicidal maniac. But that's pretty much it for the video today, guys. Let me know what you think about this one in the comments, and if you liked the video, please give it a like, and please subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.